And here we are, Captain America Civil War, Cap's third entry in the MCU, or Avengers 2.5 to some people. Joe and Anthony Russo returned to direct the first film in Marvel's Phase 3. This is a massive film. At 147 minutes, it was the longest MCU film before Avengers Infinity War, beat that at 156 minutes. Safe to say the Russo brothers make some meaty films. Civil War is a pretty pivotal point in the MCU, and I would say is the one standalone film in the MCU that requires you to have seen most of the Marvel Studios movies, or at least the Cap in Avengers films, at least more so than Iron Man 3 or Thor Ragnarok require you to. But I think by the time Civil War came around, most people were fairly aware of what was going on. Most people were following along or had some idea of what was happening. Being inspired by the Civil War comic series, this isn't an adaptation of that series, and more so uses the spirit of that comic to tell its story. Much like how X-Men Days of Future Past is very different from its comic counterpart. This obviously led to some fans being disappointed in this film, who were expecting more of the comics to be represented on the screen, leading to the title Civil Dispute being used by some fans who were disappointed in it. But of course, this is a film, not a comic book. Here, each of the characters involved need to have meaningful character arcs and have a reason for being part of the movie. Unlike a comic book where you can draw Captain America next to 50 other superheroes and call it a day. It doesn't quite work that way for films. What the Russo brothers do accomplish with their Civil War film is pretty awe-inspiring, where somehow they're able to juggle around 15 major Marvel characters in the film, and make them feel all vital and meaningful to the film, while the film also serves these characters' journeys across the MCU. Most of you watching know the story of Civil War. The Avengers are held accountable for their actions in Avengers, Winter Soldier, and Age of Ultron, where collateral damage and responsibility are very much the themes of this film. The government wants the Avengers to sign the Sokovia Accords in order to monitor their actions, which Tony Stark agrees with and Steve Rogers doesn't. While this is happening, Steve's old friend Bucky Barnes has resurfaced and is being framed for a number of crimes by a man named Helmut Zemo, who is the big puppet master trying to break the Avengers apart, and thus we have Civil War. As I said, this movie is huge. At the core of it, you've got the Captain America story, where in this sequel, Cap and Bucky Barnes are trying to set the record straight by trying to clear Bucky's name of a terrorist attack. This is very much the central point of this film, and everything else kind of builds around that. You have these last few Hydra threads that happen to connect to Tony's history, being the murder of Tony's parents at the hands of a mind-controlled Bucky Barnes. While this all feels a little too coincidental to me, it just happened to be Bucky that killed Tony's parents. It does make the conflict feel very personal, despite how big everything is. Of course, for that intimate fight between Cap, Bucky, and Tony at the end, where these former allies are close to killing each other, that whole scenario becomes so worth it, as you just want them to reconcile and stop fighting. Our three main players, Cap, Tony, Bucky, are all on their A game here. Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. get a chance to play different sides of their characters, where for once Cap isn't fighting for the American flag, but for his own personal freedom as well as the freedom of those wrongfully committed. While Tony, who traditionally has played the rebel and never cooperated with the government, is here willing to comply with them, where RDJ really gives his most personal performance of the character to date. We get to see a younger Robert Downey Jr. at the start of this film, building on the de-aging tech that we saw in Ant-Man, which I think was pulled off a little bit better in Ant-Man compared to what we get here, which here is still a little bit too uncanny valley for me. This film was also very important in the Marvel community for introducing two major Marvel characters into the film universe, Chadwick Boseman as Black Panther and Tom Holland as Spider-Man. Needless to say, Marvel somehow managed to pull them off perfectly, giving us a great introduction to T'Challa as someone filled with vengeance who feels more of the grey void and doesn't necessarily agree with Tony or Steve, but sides with Tony anyway, while at the same time giving everyone the Spider-Man they'd wanted to see on the big screen for many years. With Tom Holland, we had the high school-aged Peter Parker, who could deliver the quips and physicality that fans expected of Spider-Man. So it's great to say both Chadwick and Tom have now completely owned their characters, and cementing their status in the role for their own solo films Black Panther and Spider-Man Homecoming, which are films people have both equally fallen in love with. So it's nice to see that the little taste that we got of them in Civil War really paid off for their solo outings. While the movie has a pretty serious mood for the most part, there is some comedy and levity in there to break things up, which is appreciated and needed, otherwise this movie would feel like a drag. My favourite is still the interaction between Anthony Mackie's Falcon and Bucky Barnes. Anytime those two are on screen together, you know you're in for some laughs. The scene where the two are arguing in the car together is still just hilarious. We also get some development with characters like Scarlet Witch and Ant-Man, where thankfully Elizabeth Olsen just sticks with her natural accent while adding some ethnicity here and there. She gets a nice arc about being comfortable with who she is and not being afraid of her powers, while Ant-Man gets to experiment and become Giant Man, where he's stomping around an airport tearing off plane parts. It's awesome stuff. And how can I talk about Civil War without bringing up the airport fight? That whole fight is just still so awesome, where everyone is throwing down. I mean, it's exactly like playing with your action figures in the playground as a kid. I imagine a lot of people just skipped ahead to the airport fight when they were watching the film, because that whole sequence is just incredible, from the choreography to the effects and all the pacing. It all just pays off incredibly incredibly. It helped that John Wick directors Chad Stahelski and David Leitch were second unit directors on the film, crafting a lot of the fight and chase scenes, which gives the film that little extra bit of realism, where a lot of stunts and action are all taking place in camera, much to the style of a John Wick film. The fight scene that really shows this off the most is the big chase in Bucharest, with Black Panther and Cap trying to catch Bucky. Everything comes off exhilarating. The movie isn't all incredible though. The look of the film is a very digital grey that just comes off quite ugly, where any life or personality just seems to die in the image. I understand it's a darker film, but you can still have a darker film and still have it look good. Henry Jackman's score isn't much to run home about either, just being very standard superhero fare, with no real memorable tunes to recall. The pacing does ultimately suffer because the film is just so big. There is so much packed into it that no matter how well it all seems to work, you do feel pretty exhausted by the end of it. Not quite to the extent of Age of Ultron, but it is noticeable for sure. The lack of stakes is something that people have commented on before, and I think it's still valid. We know a lot of these characters are coming back together for Avengers Infinity War, so even though there is a split now, we know they'll eventually reconcile, which post Infinity War, I think this film will end up being a little redundant. So even though Zemo's plan ended up working, it is going to feel like a little bit of a waste by the end of all of this. He's a strong villain, but just in the grand scheme of things, isn't anything to run home about. There are no major character deaths in this film, save for Crossbones, so this is really where we feel like, okay, our Avengers characters are probably going to walk out of most of these films pretty okay, which just lessens some of the impact when these characters do find themselves in trouble. Civil War is a damn good superhero epic that I know a lot of people hold with high regard. I still think Captain America the Winter Soldier is the better Cap film, but I can see why some people might enjoy this more. But honestly, it just proves to us how talented the Russo brothers are, which means I can't wait for Infinity War. Captain America's Civil War gets an 8 out of 10 from me. Guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review. This will be the last Marvel review that I'll be doing in the lead up to Avengers Infinity War. I already have reviews for Doctor Strange through to Black Panther up on the channel already, so you can check those out if you'd like to. So if you have been following with these Marvel retrospectives, I thank you for following them. I'm looking to do some more retro reviews in the near future, so do stay tuned for those. So with that all said, stay right here for your Mono Fix. Bye guys.